My name is Garrett, and this happened during my sophomore year of college. After freshman year, I didn't secure a dorm, so I scrambled to find off-campus housing. Eventually, I landed in a co-op, part of a three-house community near campus, but not too near. It wasn't ideal, but it was cheap, and with my bike, the extra travel didn't bother me much. Most of the residents were students like me, but there were a few exceptions: alumni, TAs, even some older folks finishing degrees later in life. But one person stood out immediately, an older woman who lived in one of the other houses. She looked to be in her late 50s, though she seemed older, graying hair, a slight limp, like she had a bad back. She was always quiet, kept to herself, and wore this blank, unsettling expression. I figured she had some tie to the university, maybe faculty or an alum, but no one talked about her, and I didn't ask. The first weird moment happened in our shared kitchen. Which was odd, because the other houses had their own kitchens. Why was she in ours? She wasn't cooking, eating, or talking. Just standing there. Watching. While the rest of us joked around, made dinner, blasted music, she just stared. A few times, our eyes met, and I got this creeping feeling she was fixated on me. No one acknowledged her, which made it even stranger. Like they were used to it. Later that week, I was studying in my room when I glanced out the window, and there she was. Standing in the middle of the street, staring up at my window. It was freezing, late at night, but she didn't seem to care. I couldn't tell if she was looking at me or just the house, but my gut said me. Without thinking, I waved. Instantly, I regretted it. She didn't wave back. Instead, she jumped, like a kid who'd just been seen, then ran toward the other house. My stomach dropped. I just confirmed my room. My space. That night, I asked a housemate about her. He shrugged. She's always been here. Just ignore her like the rest of us. I pressed for answers. A senior in her house finally told me she was associated with the university, a little kooky, but not violent. When I asked why no one found her behavior weird, he said, "The property manager handles who lives here. Not us." I tried to shake it off, but things got worse. One night, I opened my door and nearly crashed into her. She was just standing there. Right outside my room. Midnight on a Tuesday, dead silence. She didn't speak, just turned and walked away, like I was the intruder. Then I lost my room key. All the rooms had individual locks. The houses used to be a hotel, and while most people didn't bother locking up, I did. Losing that key felt like a violation. A few nights later, I woke up to a soft bumping sound. Every 20 seconds or so. Coming from my closet. I'm not easily scared, but my pulse was hammering. I slid out of bed, crept toward the closet, and I yanked the door open. She was inside. One of my ties was wrapped around her neck. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. In her hand, a kitchen knife. I screamed. She lunged. We crashed to the floor, me fighting to disarm her. She was frail, but strong, scratching, biting, shrieking like something inhuman. My housemates rushed in, helping me pin her down until the police arrived. They found my missing key on her. Later, we learned the truth: she was the property manager's sister. Severely mentally ill, dumped here instead of getting real help. He was arrested for negligence, rightfully so. I pity her. But that doesn't erase the fact that she tried to kill me. I still don't know why she fixated on me. I'm graduating soon. I'll miss college, but I'll never forget that night. I've lived in the same quiet neighborhood for 20 years. My husband, Benjamin, and I raised our kids here, and now that they're grown, our two-story house feels too big, but peaceful. I spend most mornings on the front porch, knitting or listening to true crime podcasts while Benjamin putters in the garage. It's a good life. Last year, someone finally moved into the house across the street. For months, it had sat empty, and I'd gotten tired of staring at darkened windows. The new tenant was a young man, mid-20s, driving a sleek BMW, always dressed like he'd stepped out of a magazine. At first, I assumed he was one of those trust fund types, but when he introduced himself as Quinn, he turned out to be surprisingly down-to-earth. He worked in entertainment, something about freelancing for online personalities. I didn't quite get it, but Benjamin nodded along like he understood. Quinn was sharp, talked stocks with my husband, laughed at his corny jokes, even humored me when I asked if he wanted fresh tomatoes from my garden. A good kid. Then I started noticing her. A blonde girl in a white convertible, showing up at Quinn's place when he wasn't home. She'd let herself in with a key, stay for an hour or so, then leave. At first, I figured she was his girlfriend, maybe watering his plants or grabbing things he'd forgotten. Young couples are different these days. But something felt off. One evening, I saw them together. Quinn pulled into the driveway with her in the passenger seat, and I remember thinking, oh good, she's not a stalker. But then, a week later, I was pruning my roses when I heard shouting. They were in his driveway, red-faced and furious. She looked like she wanted to claw his eyes out. When she peeled away in her car, tires screeching, Quinn just stood there, running a hand through his hair like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. I told Benjamin about it that night. Probably just a breakup, he said. Not our business. But then her car kept coming back. When he wasn't there, I'd see that white convertible idling at the curb, her slipping inside like she owned the place. I almost said something to Quinn, but I didn't want to seem like a nosy old lady. Then came the sirens. It was past midnight when they woke us, flashing lights, shouting cops, an ambulance parked crooked in Quinn's driveway. Benjamin and I rushed outside, joining the cluster of neighbors in robes and slippers. The girl, Ellie, I'd later learn, was being led out in handcuffs, her face blank, like she'd already checked out. Then the EMTs wheeled Quinn out on a stretcher. Blood soaked his shirt. One of his arms was bent wrong. I didn't sleep for days after that. When Quinn finally came home, Benjamin and I brought over a casserole, because what else do you do? He looked hollowed out, but he told us everything. Ellie wasn't supposed to have a key. She'd stolen his spare, made a copy. At first, she'd seemed sweet, then came the demands, designer gifts, luxury trips, total access to his life. When he tried to end things, she'd scream, threaten, love-bomb him into staying. And every time she'd visited his house alone, she wasn't grabbing mail. She was planting cameras. In his bedroom. His bathroom. Even his damn closet. The night it happened, she'd watched him through those cameras, seen him texting a coworker, and decided it was a betrayal. She showed up with a knife. Quinn fought her off, but not before she'd sliced him open in 3 places. Doctors said if the stab to my side had gone an inch deeper, he trailed off, staring at his hands. He moved out a month later. Couldn't stand being in that house, knowing she'd lived in its walls without him seeing her. Last I heard, he'd left the state. Sometimes, I still glance at his old house, half expecting that white convertible to roll up. But it's empty again. And I lock my doors every night now. I moved to this neighborhood for a fresh start. After a bad breakup and some reckless life choices, turns out, money attracts the wrong kind of people, I needed space. This place was perfect, quiet, sprawling houses, families with kids playing in cul-de-sacs. Safe. Except for the house next door. It loomed over mine, a monstrous 2-story with a wraparound porch, close enough that I could have tossed a rock through its windows. I figured it housed some generational family, grandparents, grandkids, the whole deal. But when I finally met my neighbor, it was just Damon. A guy in his 20s, younger than me, rocking a mullet like it was 1985. He answered the door with this grin, like he'd won the lottery just seeing someone his age. Finally, a human born in my decade, he said, cutting off my awkward, new neighbor, spiel. We chatted. He was weirdly evasive about his job, finance, then a stare, admitted he lived alone, in that mansion, and gave me his number with a, "let's grab a drink." I texted him a few times, but he always had an excuse, "too busy, sorry man, next time." And then I noticed the strangeness. No visitors. No deliveries. No movement. His car never left the driveway. I work from home, and my office overlooks his property, so yeah, I noticed. The guy lived like a ghost. Then, one Wednesday at 2 a.m., I woke to blaring music. Not just music, a party. Bass shaking my windows, laughter slicing through the night. 7 cars crammed his driveway. I threw on a hoodie and marched over, ready to ask him to keep it down. No one answered the door. I pushed it open. Shoes. A dozen pairs, neatly lined up in the foyer. But the house was empty. No people. No drinks. Just that music, except now I realized it wasn't music at all. It was a recording. Laughter. Glasses clinking. A loop of party noise. My skin prickled. Down the hall, a basement door stood ajar. Faint light seeped out, along with a mechanical grinding, like a saw chewing through bone. I shouldn't have gone down. But I did. 3 men stood in the basement, older, dressed in heavy work gear, goggles, rubber gloves, boots. They were hunched over something out of view, the air thick with bleach. Then the door behind me creaked shut. I bolted. Up the stairs, through the empty house, out the front door. I vaulted my fence, heart hammering, and watched from my darkened office as 8 men spilled into Damon's yard, scanning the street. Arguing. One shoved another. Not a single neighbor's light turned on. By morning, the cars, and Damon, were gone. That was months ago. His lawn's overgrown now. Packages rot on his porch. I asked the neighbors about the party, no one heard a thing. Sometimes I stare at that house and wonder. What were they cutting up in the basement? Why fake a party? And why, when I finally worked up the courage to peek through Damon's windows last week, did I see all those shoes, still lined up in the foyer, but now covered in dust?